Welcome to another episode of This Week in Spain, brought to you by Brian Spain Domain. We are smack in the middle of the Spanish summer holiday season, which is in August, and things are pretty quiet in places like Madrid, as usual. August in general is quiet there, but those middle 10 days or so are especially tranquil. And in cities like Madrid, you can tell it's this time of year because of the reduced traffic, the closed shops and restaurants, and also the endless spaces available for parking in the street, which is a personal bonus for me. There are so many available, you can actually choose what you think is the best place for you to park your car. The other day, I needed to use my car 3 times in the morning, and every time I returned, I actually was able to park in the very same spot I left. In the rest of the year, a vacant spot stays vacant for about 15 seconds max. Anyway, it's also basically a long weekend right now as we speak, and it's one of the most important days for fiestas in all of the country, August 15th. Which is the main fiesta throughout Spain in the calendar year. Generally, it's known as the Feast of the Assumption in the Catholic calendar, and that means that most of the towns which venerate the Virgin Mary will sort of throw this huge party with fairs, carnivals, music, sometimes bullfights, and obviously religious processions and other traditions. Over 1,200 towns and cities have celebrations coming up on August 15th, and that's nearly 15% of all the towns in the country. So they are whooping it up, and with all the neighboring towns joining in, you get the sense that half the country is enjoying a fiesta. It's insane, but it can also be incredibly entertaining. Just yesterday, for example, I was at the downtown, the center of a pueblo right next door, right nearby, and they were having their fiestas, and a lot of things were going on. For example, you had this costume contest for mainly children. The kids were parading down the streets, and those streets were lined with people of all ages cheering them on. Obviously, most of them were probably friends and family, but others weren't. You could tell it was just everyone was there enjoying the experience. Just behind them, you had bars and outdoor cafes that were packed with people, families, groups of friends, once again of all ages. And then you had the peñas. These peñas are groups or clubs that are created for these fiestas. They just get together and have a fun time together throughout the entire period, because fiestas are normally not just the one day where the holiday is. They can usually last for up to a week. And these peñas, you can tell who they are because they're generally all wearing the same t-shirt, and they just go all out for days. Then you have sort of the fair, the carnival atmosphere, the food stands, the skill games booths. And there was a band on this huge stage tuning up to the tune of Tina Turner and Queen, getting ready for the big concert that night. People were mulling about, and some were looking up at the balcony of the town hall, hoping that the pregonero, or the honorary speaker who's there to kick off the fiestas, would give their inaugural speech. It was supposed to be, I think this year, to be given by some of the monks of the monastery nearby, so I was a bit intrigued and I wanted to see what that was all about, but no one was there. It was 45 minutes behind schedule for no apparent reason, and that's because there generally is no reason. Other than that, things will sometimes progress slowly at these events. You have your program, and then you have reality. The night is early. It was only 9:45. The concert wouldn't begin till at least 11:30, probably later, go on to maybe 3 or 4 in the morning. And then after that, you had a DJ show in a different spot down near the river that started at 4:30 in the morning and would go on until dawn. That's typical fiesta scheduling. And it was only Saturday. There were still 3 days left to go. Sunday would be the same, as would Monday. And Tuesday is the actual holiday itself, when people actually begin to calm down and take it easy a little bit. And basically the same thing is happening all over the country. If you live in the center of one of these towns and you want to get some rest, well, forget it. You might as well just go to the beach or go somewhere else because the fiestas are full of energy and they go on for a long time. But they're also incredibly fun. Don't think that you have to stay out all night, every night. You don't have to do it any night. People come and go as they please. And that's the cool thing about them. Things are just flexible. You do what you want. It's also a nice way to take a break from the heat. And speaking of heat, the weather is also hot in a figurative sense in the political scene as the different parties jostle to find a way out of that stalemate that the elections brought to the country. As of the recording of this podcast, nothing has been settled, and both sides, by that I mean sort of the left and the right, find themselves in complicated situations. And on top of that, I guess the only news that was sort of notable from last week is that the far-right party Vox has experienced a bit of a shake-up as a senior member of the party departed. It's a party that didn't do as well as it expected in the election, and now we'll see what happens down the road. Due to the complexity of the situation, I will refrain from going into further detail and will keep you posted on the latest developments as they come. By the next episode, we should have a clear idea of where things are going. Anyway, as for other news that stood out to me since our last episode, one that I've decided to talk about was the death of the great cyclist Federico Martin Bahamontes, more famously known as Federico Bahamontes, or simply Bahamontes, who passed away on Tuesday, August 8th, at the ripe old age of 95. This is a day in 2023 that also saw the passing of the singer-songwriter Sixto Rodriguez, who was the focus of that incredible documentary called Searching for Sugar Man, one of the most incredible stories I've ever heard. If you've never seen that documentary, I recommend you do, and I also recommend you listen to his music. Anyway, in Spain, though, Bahamontes grabbed the headlines, and it surprised me because just like in the last episode where I talked about the late cartoonist Francisco Ibáñez, I also, for some reason, thought that Bahamontes had already died. And I guess partly because you never really saw him on TV anymore. No one really talked about him. So during my first years in Spain, I was lucky enough to watch firsthand the golden years of Spanish cycling of the 80s and 90s with Pedro Delgado and especially the legendary Miguel Indurain. I remember being with my friends riveted to the TV as Indurain would sort of blow away the opposition in the time trials or peel away his challengers going up the hills. And it was really exciting. I learned that there was something incredibly exciting about this sport. It isn't always like that. It's sometimes perfect for siestas. You just sort of watch it in the background and nod off. But you can also have extremely exciting moments. So this was a special treat for me to be here when that was all happening. And since then, I've learned that watching the tour is sort of a special moment. I don't always get a chance, but I try to make sure that I watch at least one stage of the Tour de France, especially a mountain stage if possible. If I can, it's an obligatory date with my couch and my TV every summer. But anyway, it was when I was first learning about this sport and the great names that my friend Pepe told me all about the great Bahamontes. Obviously, I'd never heard of him, and I'm certain that many of you haven't. So who was this guy? Let me tell you a little bit about him. Bahamontes, known as the Eagle of Toledo, Toledo being the city that's about an hour south of Madrid, was a classic in the Tour de France. He was the first Spaniard to win the Gran Boucle, as they call it, and that was all the way back in 1959, and he quickly became a legendary figure in this sport, both in Spain and abroad. He specialized in climbing, as in going up the mountains, and he won the King of the Mountain title in the Tour de France 6 times. Only one other cyclist since then has won that title more than he has, and that was Richard Virenque. I think he's won it 7 times. He also won the King of the Mountain competition in the other races, the Tour of Italy and the Tour of Spain. His ability to tear up the sides of these hills and mountains left his opponents speechless. His physique, he was sort of wiry, pure muscle and fiber. He must have had that perfect body for that type of cycling. He also must have had a hell of a lot of determination and an ultra high threshold of pain. Apparently, it was a wonder to watch him go up. And even though his achievements were a long time ago, they have not gone unforgotten. In 2013, when they were celebrating the 100th anniversary of the Tour de France, the sports magazine L'Equipe, which is the most important sports magazine in France, named Bahamontes the best climber in the history of the Tour de France. Which of course probably would have been a source of debate among pundits, but it still is quite a distinction. And to think that he was able to do all of this with a bike that weighed somewhere around 12.8 kilos, that's at least what he said, so that's nearly 30 pounds. High-end pro bikes these days weigh half that much. And let's not forget the limited gears that they use to go uphill. It must have been as close to torture as you can get. Bahamontes had a fascinating life. He was born in a small town in the province of Toledo called Santo Domingo Caudilla, but his family soon moved to the city of Toledo, which would basically be his hometown from there on in. His family was limited in means, and everyone had to sort of chip into the household economy. Federico worked as a mule driver during the Spanish Civil War and even a runner for the black market during the years of hardship after the war. By his own admission, he wanted to become a soccer player, but his parents were against it. And then he moved on to cycling, but his folks were also opposed to that idea too. Let's put a little context here. We are talking about difficult times in Spain, and probably most parents weren't too keen on the idea that their son was going to get involved in sports where there was no guarantee of income and no job security. So for reasons like that, normally most families were just not in favor of that. Plus, as you can imagine, back then, the Tour de France was not the moneymaker that it is today, and there were no teams really. Cyclists were sort of on their own. They had to figure it out. Bahamontes himself describes it, that sense of helplessness, especially the first year. He just didn't know where to go. He couldn't speak the language, and no one really helped him. So it must have been quite an adventure. Anyway, with some of the money that he earned, he was able to buy his first bike at the age of 19. So we are talking about a late bloomer. That was in 1947. But he soon made a name for himself by winning a number of big races in Spain, and he finally made it to the big time when he was selected for the Tour de France in 1954. In his debut, he would win the first of his 6 King of the Mountain titles. It certainly caught the attention of a lot of the experts at the time. And that was also the year that the famous ice cream story was born. Now, this is an anecdote that has been told over and over with variations of all kinds and have sort of turned it into a legend of sorts. In fact, the first time I heard it was with my friend Pepe back in the 90s, and he told me that what happened was Bahamontes was excellent at going uphill, but he was scared of going downhill. And that what he had done was beat everyone to the top of the mountain, and then he had an ice cream and waited for the next rider to come along so that they could accompany him on the way down. Now, this wasn't at all unthinkable. Cycling today is a dangerous sport, and especially going downhill, horrible accidents and even fatal accidents will happen to this day as cyclists go down these mountains. If you ask a professional cyclist today what was the worst part about cycling in the past, we're talking 50, 60, 70 years ago, they will almost always say that going downhill must have been terrifying. with the rudimentary brake systems that they used back then, the roads, the way they were, the tires. It was almost a miracle more people didn't die. Nonetheless, it seems that that wasn't the real reason for the ice cream break, nor was he showing off as others accused him of. He had broken a couple of spokes on his way up and was waiting for a repairman to come and fix it. So, while he was waiting, he saw someone selling ice cream. He said, "Hey, I'll do that." Apparently, he actually did terribly in the rest of the stage. I think the ice cream had a negative impact on his body at the end of the day. Anyway, so the ice cream story is true, but the reality is a little bit less interesting than the legend, and that's often the case. Anyway, some feel that Bahamontes could have and should have won more tours, but let's not forget that these were also years when the great Jacques Anquetil, one of the greatest cyclists of all time, was racing, and he himself won 5. So the competition was pretty stiff back then, but Bahamontes was universally admired for his bravery, his toughness, and his great climbing. Anyway, after he retired, Bahamontes returned to his basically native Toledo, and he opened a bike store there, which he ran for decades, and that's where he lived basically for the rest of his life. The city erected a statue of him depicting him sort of plowing up a hill. They have it on a part of the statue is on a bronze ramp, and you see that sort of wiry body, those pure fiber muscles, all tensed, that expression of suffering on his face. And that was back in 2018. It was a perfect place to put the statue because Toledo has a lot of very steep hills, and it was probably there where he first began to train those powerful legs of his. So anyway, we will leave it on that note, a sincere and dear tribute to a great athlete and an iconic figure in Spanish sport and Spanish culture. And we just wanted to share this story with you. And that'll be all for this episode of This Week in Spain, brought to you by Brian Spain Domain. Hope it's been helpful and informative. Please leave us any questions or comments because we love the feedback. You can subscribe to our podcast on Spotify, Apple, Amazon, and Castos. Or if you wish to support Brian's Spain Domain, we'd greatly appreciate it. We work very hard to provide you with the best information about Spain, Spanish history, and Spanish culture, and we love sharing it with you. You can support us by clicking on our PayPal donate button, or if you want to have access to absolutely all of our podcasts and support us regularly, you can check us out on Patreon at the link provided below. Stay well, stay safe, and hasta pronto.